All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Today is Tuesday, August 31st, 2021, and we actually have quite a bit of news today to cover. So first off, I just want to let everybody know that I'm going to be covering stories from all around the world. I would dare to say probably the most significant coverage in at least the last few days with regards to what's been going on all over the world, really. But first off, I want to start by citing an article from the BBC called the Theranos scandal. Who is Elizabeth Holmes and why is she on trial? So this was a Silicon Valley, up-and-comer, if you want to call her, and she was allegedly a big entrepreneur. She founded this tech company in 2014. She dropped out of Stanford University. The company was valued at about $9 billion US dollars. Allegedly, she brought about a quote-unquote revolution in diagnosing disease. Basically, her company, with a few drops of blood, Theranos, her company, promised that its Edison test could detect conditions such as cancer and diabetes quickly without the hassle of needles. Now, here's the thing, though. Take a look at some of the people that invested in the company. Henry Kissinger, which I thought that guy was like just, sitting on his, part of my English, sitting on his corrupt butt, just kind of sitting back pulling the strings. And then Rupert Murdoch as well also invested. Rupert Murdoch allegedly lost 120 million euros that he had invested in the company. Now, Elizabeth Holmes faces, she's now 37 years old, faces up to 20 years in prison if found guilty of the 12 charges of fraud against her, and her trial begins next month. But interestingly enough, her lawyers are going to argue that her ex-boyfriend and business partner, Ramesh Balwani, sexually abused and emotionally controlled her at the time of the crime, impairing her mental state, end quote. Now, I bring this up because it's quite a prevalent story in the sense that, you don't see that this happen that often with regards to people scamming some big-time elite players, if you want to call it. Scams happen all the time, don't get me wrong, but she scammed Henry Kissinger and Rupert Murdoch. I'm not trying to say, we should stay afraid of these elites. We got to stand up to them, of course, but holy shit. She better have some connections on a personal level to be able to make sure that she's okay. Look, if they don't kill her, they're just going to ruin her life. It's already ruined at this point. After her trial is over and she does her time, guaranteed she's going to leave Silicon Valley, assuming she gets found guilty. But look, I'll be honest, being realistic here, I'm not supporting this whatsoever, but if you're going to be a con person or a scammer or what have you, generally speaking, the con men or con women that get away with things are the ones that know the people they screw won't, snap back at them with lawsuits and maybe even physical danger threats and stuff like that. I can tell you now, Rupert Murdoch, maybe not so much, but Henry Kissinger, in my opinion, he'll make some moves depending on how much money he's lost. But again, to guys like that, sometimes it's maybe not even worth it. Depending, right? Anyways, the next thing is that Israel and Jordan are poised for unprecedented boom in water cooperation amid increasing climate pressures, which are causing droughts to their, agriculture, farming, things like that. Again, putting the climate change thing aside, I think it's great to see when countries work together. But again, ironically enough, sadly enough, countries only tend to work together when they absolutely need to, particularly within that region of the world, the Middle East, right? Again, we can argue the same for Africa. We can argue that even the West and Europe are the same, just at a more, I guess you could say, quote-unquote, diplomatic level. It's more of a brain sort of strategy of chess in the West and Europe, whereas in Africa, in the Middle East, it's more direct, power and control, if you want to call it, with regards to the way things are executed. So again, we'll see what comes of this, but, The next thing is that 90 retired generals have called for the resignation of Defense Secretary Austin and Mark Milley. Again, look, this is, I believe a lot of these generals were the same generals that called for, I forgot what it was, a handful of months ago as well. Something that the Biden administration did that they didn't like. I think it was, don't quote me on this, guys. I think it was something with mandating COVID vaccines. When word first got out that the Biden administration was going to do this, these generals got pissed off, if I'm not mistaken. And look, freedom of speech, they have the right to do so. They've served honorably for their country. This should be taken very, very seriously. But again, I don't see any mainstream media outlets picking up the story, right? Again, they're calling for the resignation because of what happened in Afghanistan. And I got a bit of a bone to pick now, too, with that situation, in the sense that whether or not this was an intelligence operation to continue a prolonged war for the military-industrial complex, putting that stuff aside for a second, guys, I'm not, I blame I blame General Milley. I blame Secretary of Defense Austin. I blame Biden. They left military animal rescue dogs in their cages at the airport. It's not like they even let the dogs out of the cages so maybe they could escape and sort of survive. And then there's footage last night, which has been allegedly confirmed by the LA Times and many other mainstream media outlets, that the Taliban, direct footage with a reporter right in there with them, they've taken over the United States soldiers' gear and suits and things like that. At first, I'm watching a video thinking, I thought all the soldiers were gone. And then I find out that these were Taliban members that took on the suits. Now, I believe our friend of the show, Gordon, and brother, thank you always for watching and listening. Gordon, you had mentioned that the Taliban are going to have a very difficult time attempting to repair the equipment. Now, I appreciate you saying that because there were two groups of people I saw around the world in terms of what they were speculating on Afghanistan with regards to the $85 billion worth of weapons that have been left there, Chinooks, Humvees, you name it, right? One group said, oh, don't worry about it. They don't know how to operate most of the stuff anyways. Another group said, even if they can operate it, they're going to have a hard time attempting to repair it. I believe the repair part. I don't believe the operated part. Why? Yesterday, for those who don't know, the Taliban literally hung someone by a rope and hung that rope to a helicopter and flew it around Afghanistan, I believe near the Kabul airport, I guess to make a statement or what have you, right? I thought they said they didn't know how to fly him. I thought people said they didn't know how to work him. I thought people said, oh, don't worry, right? Again, I'm not trying to say I told you so, not even close. I still stand by what our friend Gordon said and many others too about they may have issues repairing it. I'm not a vet by any means. I'm not an expert. I know many of you vets that watch the show will probably know much more than I do. But there were a lot of people I saw online and around the world saying, don't worry, they don't know how to fly the helicopters. They don't know how to work. Come on, really? So anyways, the next thing is that Nike has given their staff a 1-week mental health break. It's about goddamn time. I mean, Nike, Amazon, these guys, it's about freaking time, if you ask me, right? So we'll see what comes of this. I'm sure it'll be a good positive thing, but they got to do this more often for people, in my opinion. The next thing is that Britain faces a £371 billion sterling shortfall, according to banks and financial experts, analysts, you name it. Now, again, these experts and analysts have been wrong many times. With that being said, a £371 billion shortfall, that's not exactly chump change, right? Especially for a nation or a country, right? It's north of $250 billion at that point. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the UK economy will bounce back. Many people are seeing that already, whether it's, the food business, the entertainment business, you name it, right? People are seeing the airline business, a lot of big hopes. They're already seeing a surge in consumer purchasing and things like that. So I don't think there's going to be as much of a concern as people initially thought, but we'll see what happens. And not just in the UK, in the West, in Europe, you name it, right? Again, it depends on how you look at it. Depends on how you look at the data too. It's all perception, right? The next thing is that Toyota has just restarted their driverless vehicles after a big accident that occurred previously. Look, I'm very simply putting all the I guess you could say the proposals aside and what have you. Companies make mistakes. I'm not trying to brush off someone's death as that, but shit does happen. And again, not to oversimplify, but that's life. I could walk outside right now and get hit by a truck. Nothing's guaranteed in this world, right? The next thing is that CDC advisors have unanimously voted 14-0 to recommend Pfizer and BioNTech's COVID vaccine for all Americans age 16 and older. And the WHO has published a guiding document for countries and implementing partners on the introduction of digital vaccine certificates. And the work was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation, among others. End quote. I'm just going to say this, guys. I'm not trying to imply any extreme conspiracy, but if you don't even question at this point when you hear Rockefeller, Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation, and the WHO and the World Economic Forum, I mean, come on. There was an article recently I saw the World Economic Forum is trying to promote a mask, a COVID mask, that also tests you for COVID while you're wearing the mask, and it sends that data to your phone, which again, once it gets to your phone, it could be collected from anyone at that point, as long as you got someone who's good enough at hacking into it. So again, if you don't, if red alarms don't go off in your mind just when you see and read those names, you don't have to believe that the Gates Foundation is running, a child trafficking ring, although that's been speculated. You don't have to believe that. But if you don't see that there's if you don't at least take a step back and say from a corporate or business sense, look at the corruption, look at how close all these people are. Why is it always the same people saying we know what's best for the world? The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the big banks, the Gates Foundations, all those kind of people, the Jeff Bezoses of the world, right? Again, if you don't see a reoccurrence there, and people, in my opinion, people generally who are brainwashed will say, and I say this because I have family that says this, they'll say, well, that's because they're the best at what they do. No, not always. Not always. Bill Gates made software. Yes, he did a good job making the Windows computers and all that, but that doesn't, he's conflating the two now. His father was a eugenicist, yeah, but again, you look at the history, the lineage. I'm not trying to get all conspiratorial here, but come on. You got to at least think, holy crap, Rockefeller Foundation, Gates, something's up. The next thing is that, let's take a look here. Nancy Pelosi's selected January 6th committee has now asked 35 major communications companies, including major cell service providers, to preserve records for, quote, individuals potentially involved with discussions, end quote, in planning January 6th. Now, it's interesting because allegedly the FBI, again, not reported by the mainstream media because it doesn't suit the narrative right now, the FBI said they didn't find any evidence of there being a coordinated or plotted attack or a conspire to plan something on the 6th. This is from what I recall. I could be mistaken, but again, notice how things are constantly, the mainstream media ignores that, but then they bring this up, or they bring up things like this. So, actually, sorry, this wasn't reported by mainstream media per se, but anyways, you see what I mean. The next thing is that U.S. General McKenzie said, and I quote, this was just as of this morning, "We did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out with regards to Afghanistan. Very few hundreds of U.S. citizens were left behind, and at least 2,000 hardcore ISIS fighters are now roaming Afghanistan." End quote. The top U.S. general also praised the Taliban for their, quote, very good efforts, end quote, in guarding the Kabul airport. Jesus Christ. There's, in my opinion at least, I could be wrong, but in my opinion, there are so many things wrong with that statement. Holy cow. The Taliban was our enemy, and then now they're our friend. Okay, yeah, because, friends of the West, which are supposed to be all pro-democracy, again, quite ironic on both sides, but, the friends of the West are, now murdering women for being educated and not wearing hijabs, if I'm not mistaken, and they're now hanging people by a rope, hanging them by the head and attaching it to a helicopter. Oh yeah, those are our friends. We should praise them. Again, it was such a fuck up. Pardon my English. They had no choice. They had to just beg the Taliban to help them out, which is ridiculous if you ask me. In my humble opinion, again, this would never happen in reality, unfortunately, but if something like this occurs, you get that alien tech out. You save our servicemen. You save our the people who are serving, our very hardworking and honorable men and women. You get that alien tech out, and you do what you have to do with whatever advanced tech you have to get those people out of there. And I know this is a bit of a stretch, but you're telling me if they really wanted to, they couldn't. I mean, it might sound far-fetched, but teleport, really, using this technology, or somehow create a path for these soldiers to get out. But again, it would expose the technology, which would then devalue everything, and the power structure, power over death for these people, right? So the next thing is that Paramount Pictures has filed a lawsuit in the U.S. claiming that a Mission Impossible 7 insurance payout falls far short of COVID-related losses. Paramount said that it had stopped filming 7 times during the pandemic for reasons including UK government travel restrictions. Before I go on, for those of you who may recall, there was a leaked audio tape of Tom Cruise freaking out about people not quarantining on set. Apparently, Tom Cruise spent like $1 or $2 million of his own money to create a quarantine bubble on every set where they were filming for the producers, the cameramen. People weren't listening, and he snapped, stuff like that. So I don't know. Anyways, let me see here. Paramount alleges the federal insurance company paid out only $5 million US, even though the losses were many times that. They've been approached, the insurance company's been approached for comment, but nothing got back yet. Again, it's typical business. Insurance doesn't want to pay out. The studios may have enough pull this time because they'll get their lawyers on it and things like that. There might be an exception here because of the power that Paramount Pictures has, but we'll see what happens, right? It's pretty simple business in my opinion, unless there's an angle here that I'm missing, but I don't think there's any intelligence angle to this whatsoever. The next thing is that Turkey and the United Arab Emirates leaders are holding phone calls in a sign of improving ties. Again, coincidentally, right after the U.S. leaves Afghanistan. I'm not saying the West or America should have stayed there, but notice Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, he's smart. He's moving in. Notice too at the same time how the West in general, I'm not blaming anyone in particular, even Europe, never really went after the Saudis or UAE for their ties to Al Qaeda and 9/11 and things like this. So it just kind of goes to show you how the West, in correspondence with Europe and NATO allies, they tend to play both sides against the middle to control the narrative, right? Create the problem, then create the solution, repeat, rinse, repeat, So that's my take, at least. The next thing is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are expected to resume direct talks soon once Iran's new regime settles in, according to Saudi Arabian officials. With regards to peace, cooperation, things like that. Look, in my opinion, at this point, moving forward, now that the West is out of Afghanistan and all that, let them have their talks. I know the U.S. is going to want to be in on everything. They're going to want to have their representatives or quote-unquote ambassadors there, which will really be, more so CIA intelligence-oriented. But to kind of see what's going on, it's that imperialistic mindset, right? It comes down to the debate. Should there be a sort of imperialistic big brother like the U.S. looming over the world or not? And it's both arguments could be very valid. It's just you got to keep that big brother in check, which arguably it's not right now, right? The next thing is that Tanzanian opposition leader Freeman Mbowe, hopefully I said his name correctly, is in court to face charges. He has been in jail since this past July when he was arrested on terror-related charges. Of course, and also other party members as well have been charged too and arrested. Of course, U.S. and British representatives are going to be at this trial. To make sure things go over well and all that. Ultimately, it's to make sure that the power structure stays in place, if you ask me, at a molecular level. But if you don't manage things at a smaller level, then it just kind of flows up the chain and everything collapses. So the U.S. wants to keep their subtle influence intact, if you want to call it. And, Britain is right there too. MI6, CIA, Mossad, all three, I would put them at equal playing fields, depending on which area, but you know what I mean. The next thing is that 6 people were sentenced to death in Bangladesh for killing LGBTQ activists. Look, I'm not for killing in certain circumstances, but I mean, I'm going to be maybe ruthlessly and morally heartless here. I'm not going to argue with that. Why'd you go kill LGBTQ people? Or humans to begin with. Forget that they're LGBT, just people, right? So, again, this comes down to, should we have an opinion on what other countries' forms of punishment are, right? The next thing is that allegedly less than 2% of Africa's 1.3 billion people are fully vaccinated against COVID. Again, they're calling the UN is calling the UN is calling the rollout a disgrace, they're disappointing, things like that. If the people don't want it, assuming this is the case, if they can get to it but they don't want it, I agree with what Putin said, like I mentioned yesterday. Respectfully, there should be some form of encouragement, even though I don't think so, but let's, to play both sides, let's be fair. But at the same time, people should not be fearful of losing their jobs at companies. People should not be fearful of having to, do this and that if they don't get it, right? So let's be fair and let's be equal and even keel on both sides, right? The next thing is that a U.S. wildfire has forced a massive Lake Tahoe evacuation. Again, could this be HARP? Could this be some type of satellite technology? We got to speculate, guys, because I don't believe a single thing of official narratives at this point. And I'm sure many of you don't either, which is probably why you're watching or listening to this. The next thing is that the Taliban is in talks with Qatar and Turkey to manage the Kabul airport. Again, going back to what I said before. So I'm not really going to touch on that again. The next thing is that Hurricane Ida allegedly knocked out offshore oil and gas production in the Gulf of Mexico and caused catastrophic damage to the Louisiana grid. Oil and gas plants will have major hurdles to get going again, according to experts. But again, notice how all of a sudden the oil has edged up in price because of this. So did someone create the demand here, or was this a genuine accident? We got to ask ourselves. The next thing is that John Kerry went to China and Japan for talks on cutting emissions. Okay, sure. I mean, yeah. Again, I got to be honest. We don't know if this is the official reason why governments constantly lie about official reasons, even the positions of the people and all that of the people that are going. Sometimes they don't even mention who else is going. They obfuscate or whatever you want to call it, right? So, assuming this is legit and not some form of intelligence operation, this is a legit meeting. At least they're speaking with China about something. As to how productive those talks will be is a different story, though. The next thing is that, according to the FBI, hate crime in the U.S. has hit a 12-year high in 2020. Sure, but you can't use that as justification, in my opinion, for surveilling people within your own country more. Why? You had racial tensions. You had a virus, people losing their jobs. I mean, you can't, or you had a pandemic at least to say. You can't use those stats as a justification for something, but I bet, in my opinion, Nancy Pelosi's select January 6th committee will, right? So, and again, I'm not against the committee, but I have, my own take on that thing. The next thing is that a bunch of kids in Chile were able to get internet now thanks to Starlink, Elon Musk's Starlink. But again, it's great that they now have connection and access to the world. Let them have their fun and enjoy that access that they've never had before. Let them discover the internet. But man, little do they know that I'm betting Starlink has got NSA, and CIA software right in there to spy on people. You don't think that these satellites went up without the permission quietly of those pulling the strings, right? Again, using as data collection, whether Elon Musk knows it or not, a backdoor into Starlink, and you're now collecting data on people in third world countries and you name it that you never had before. Pretty simple, if you ask me. The next thing is that UK vets have euthanized Geronimo the alpaca despite protests and outcry. I wanted to cover this because I think it's a little bit of an interesting debate to have with regards to animals. I'm very passionate about animals myself, but it's controversial because the alpaca tested positive for bovine TB 2 times, or bovine TB. The thing is that this particular infection, bovine TB, can jump from these alpacas to humans and cause serious tuberculosis issues in humans. So that's why they euthanized and put down this alpaca. Again, the debate is there a way to maybe quarantine him for the rest of his life? Who's to say that he should, humans should decide to put him down? But there are tough decisions. Sometimes there are very black and white tough decisions that we wish there was a middle ground, but there isn't. I'm not saying putting him down was the right thing, but it's debatable. The next thing is that Poland seeks emergency orders amid asylum seeker surge at the Poland and Belarus border. Okay, yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see because, Putin's tied in with the Belarus prime minister or president, if I'm not mistaken. They at least have, semi-decent conversations and talks and what have you. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. If Putin will maybe help out, it'll look good. He did give a loan to Belarus recently because of that whole thing with that plane incident and the flying and the sanctions and the kidnapping and that what happened a month and a half ago or what have you. So he'll insert himself wherever he can, however he can, right? And it's I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just strategy. So the next thing is that France and the UK are set to propose a Kabul safe zone to the UN. Are you... Okay, yeah, because pardon my English, because you guys in NATO, US and NATO fucked up so much, even Canada fucked up so much on the evacuation that now you want to have safe zones? And when you propose this to the UN, who in the UN is going to go talk to the Taliban about this? And who in the Taliban is going to take this seriously right after they started shooting bullets in the sky last night celebrating that US soldiers had left? Who's going to... You see what I'm saying here? What's with this safe zone? I don't know. What bothers me is that the way it happened from the beginning should have never occurred, should have never happened the way it did. Now, if they did a proper evacuation and then proposed a safe zone after that, sure. But even then, I would still be skeptical, right? So, because, it could be, NATO's intelligence angle and the CIA and MI6 trying to get in there to stay in there for the lithium. Who knows? Who the hell knows, right? The next thing is that the U.S. intel community remains, quote, divided on the COVID origin. Yeah, okay, whatever. Next thing is that R. Kelly's first male accuser is testifying to his abuse, I believe, yesterday or today. Yeah, no, again, let them prove he's guilty and reprimand and punish accordingly, right? As the justice system is supposed to work in that sense. The next thing is that there's a problem in Europe, allegedly, in a, I guess you could say, economic or social sense within society, because too many people are out degreeing one another, meaning that too many kids, as I'm sure there are many dropouts as well, or people who don't even go to university, but too many students, and I'm sure I know the problem, we have this issue here too in Toronto. They're getting so many degrees these days that 1 or 2 degrees is not enough for a high-paying or even a decent-paying job. So you now have kids just putting themselves more and more into school debt to learn, which we can debate about, the education of that and how much is real and how much we're lied to depending on what you learn in school and university. But they go now apply for a job. They have 2 degrees. They think it looks great, and it should be, presumably, and it's not. And it's like, oh, well, we picked this other person because they got 4 degrees. So what are people going to do now? Spend 10, 20 years after high school? You think I'm kidding, guys, but I've seen it firsthand. Spend 10, 15 years in school just to come out and, be in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, if not maybe close to $1 million at that point in debt, in liquid cash in debt. And on top of that, you find a job that's, maybe after your 10, 15 years, you come out and you make $250,000 a year or $100,000 a year, $150,000 a year. But relative to what? Now you got to buy, now you got a mortgage on your ass because you're probably going to buy a place, put a down payment for a place. You now have your school debt. It's a clusterfuck. It's a clusterfuck. It's exploiting the system for profit. Simple, right? So again, and then on the front end, publicly, these institutions keep saying, or these companies keep saying, get more degrees. It's a win-win. These private companies help the universities, which is why these private business executives so coincidentally invest and donate all these grants to business universities too, not to mention the benefits of the tax exemptions as well. So with that being said, please forgive me for a little bit of a rant there, but I hope all of you caught up, well informed on what's been going on the news of the day, and we'll catch all of you later tonight for a live stream. Cheers.